Well, hey, as you can see, Umpqua Watersheds has been really busy and productive. The next part of our program is our guest speaker, Jeff McEnroe. Jeff's going to talk about the Archie Creek Fire Restoration Project from a fisheries biologist perspective. From a very young age, Jeff was obsessed with throwing logs larger than himself into the creeks and rivers where his dad was trying to fish, which earned him the nickname Woody. Jeff received his bachelor's degree in fisheries science from Oregon State University, and a glutton for punishment, he decided to go after a master's degree while studying juvenile salmon passage through culverts. After several fun temporary jobs, Jeff ended up at the Roseburg Bureau of Land Management, where he gets to be a kid again and put logs larger than himself back into the streams. When he isn't working, Jeff is an avid fly fisherman, rafter, photographer, husband, and father. So, take it away, Jeff.
It's an honor to be here, and I'm going to talk tonight about the Rock Creek restoration and the Archie Creek Fire. I think a lot of you know about the Archie Creek Fire, so I'll probably keep that pretty brief. But we're basically going to cover the fire impacts, why Rock Creek is a priority, kind of the need for post-fire restoration, and then kind of what we have planned up there. And then just to note, this presentation really just covers the work on the BLM lands. Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is working on some of the private lands, and the Forest Service has kind of their own plan. So the first thing I like to talk about is the notable species in Rock Creek, because you get asked why Rock Creek a lot, and it's because we have a very diverse assemblage of fish species up there. Spring Chinook salmon, one of the only tributaries off the North Umpqua where the spring Chinook spawn outside of the main river. We have Oregon Coast Coho salmon, summer and winter steelhead, three different life histories of the coastal cutthroat trout, Pacific lamprey. We have the western pearl shell mussel and the foothill yellow-legged frog, which are both bureau-sensitive species. And I think my favorite critter, we have a lot of beaver activity up there. So, there's a potential for a lot of watershed benefits up there that nature can provide through beavers. And so Rock Creek really has arguably some of the best potential salmonid habitat in the North Umpqua because it has these large, intact floodplains, which I'll go into later. So the Archie Creek Fire started September 8th, 2020. It's a day I'll remember forever. I was out in the field and saw the column come up, and I watched it burn that whole day into the evening. Some of the most extreme fire behavior I've ever seen in 20 years of fighting fires. It ended up burning 131,000 acres. And what I really like to set home with folks is that this was a once-in-a-centuries disturbance event based on the amount of old-growth forests that burned with 100% mortality. And so to state it in a different way, this area hasn't burned with this intensity for at least 200 or 300 years. And that kind of sets the stage for some of the restoration work and some of the unknown impacts that we're going to talk about. So this is just some quick photos from the watershed. This is East Fork Rock Creek, 100% riparian mortality in here. Basically everything is dead there. And then this is a photo of Lower Rock Creek. I like to show this one because you can see the old growth stand in the background of the photo there. And even though it looks like there's needles on those trees, those are all brown, and all of those trees died in the fire. So the aftermath of the fire, I'm sure everybody's aware, lost 109 structures, including the Rock Creek hatchery. We basically had a 98 to 100% tree mortality in a 100 square mile area, and like 70% of the Rock Creek watershed was burned, 40,000 acres in like high severity. So that resulted in basically a complete loss of stream shade for the streams within that fire area. Now, what are some of the predicted impacts? That's a little harder to do just because we're talking about something that hasn't happened for 200 or 300 years, and so trying to understand the impacts of that, there's a lot of questions out there. But We do have a burned area emergency response team that came in. They do some hydraulic analysis, and they predicted anywhere from 300 to an 800% increase in peak flows in streams in the fire area. And, there's some things that I think are common sense that we're going to know happen. We don't know to what extent they're going to happen. And so we have, as the tree roots deteriorate, we're going to have landslides and mass wasting. We're going to have fire-killed trees that are falling into the streams. Our stream temperatures are going to increase. We're going to get increases in primary production because we have increased sunlight hitting the streams. And you can be sure that we're going to have a lot of noxious weeds that take advantage of all this disturbed area. So, most studies point to fish populations decreasing for, about 3 to 5 years because of all these impacts post-fire. But then the positive note is those fish populations tend to rebound and actually do better, in that kind of intermediate disturbance time. So we have something to look forward to. So why do we need to even do restoration in the first place? I'm sure a lot of folks here know the reasons why, but I like to just go through them real quick to make sure kind of everybody's on the same page. Really, the reason is, we had basically industrialized logging from the 1940s to the 1980s with, almost no protections on streams. This heavily impacted Rock Creek. That picture in the top right is a BLM bulldozer pushing wood out of the creek. They thought that wood in the creek was a bad thing for a long time, that it blocked salmon from spawning. And anyway, they spent a lot of time taking log jams out of creeks. And then there was even a mill, that picture in the lower right there, the Douglas County Mill from the 1940s to the 1950s in the watershed. So, even more impacts from that. And then you add on to that, channel manipulation, riparian harvest, riparian road building. And then after, in the middle of all that, we get the 1964 flood. And so that's resulted in very degraded or simplified stream conditions in Rock Creek. And so we estimate that the stream downcut about 6 to 8 feet. There's almost no large wood or log jams left. So when it downcut, it disconnected from those big extensive floodplains and side channels that had developed. And it really just resulted in unnaturally high stream energy. So we can't get logs to catch anymore in the basin because that energy is so high. And so any trees or substrate that moves into Rock Creek gets, flushed right down to the North Umpqua. It doesn't get caught in Rock Creek. So we can look at Archie Creek Fire as a tragic loss, which it was, or as I've kind of come to eventually is an opportunity to right those wrongs in the past. We know there's going to be a lot of substrate coming in, a lot of wood coming in, and we need to capture that and start rebuilding this watershed of the stream. Some of the basic goals of the restoration work that we're planning is to replace those missing pieces. We got to get those large, stable log jams back into the system. We need to decrease that stream energy, allowing gravel to abrade and create spawning beds. We need to capture that post-fire substrate and wood moving through the system like I just talked about. And then we need to reconnect those extensive floodplains and side channels. We're looking at a multi-phased approach. We prioritized reaches, and kind of the situation on the ground dictates, what and how much we can accomplish. So we're focusing on kind of the most bang for the buck on the phase. We're looking right now at a 3-phase approach. Phase 1 is we're going to try to put as many trees into Rock Creek as possible to build these large, stable log jams. We need to utilize these fire-killed trees now because if we don't utilize them now, they'll be lost to hazard tree work, either through right-of-way agreements or through the own BLM process of hazard treeing roads and recreation sites. And so we want to utilize these trees now while we have them. And then also the trees start deteriorating. And so if we wait 3 years to put these trees in, when we fall them or push them over, they're going to break into much smaller pieces and not be as useful for creating these large jams. And then we also need to capture this wood that's going to be moving through the system next winter. And so we really want to get some stuff in there to capture that. phase 2, we're looking at enhancing and reconnecting the floodplains, providing that off-channel habitat and cold water refugia as the stream temperatures come up. And then phase 3, we just know we're going to have to do some adaptive management in phases 1 and 2 because we're in such a dynamic area with unpredictable impacts coming. And then we're really going to focus on the riparian and tributary restoration in that third phase. So phase 1 is, as I talked about, we got to replace those fundamental log jams that were in Rock Creek historically that allowed wood to accumulate and substrates to upgrade. We're going to be doing that this summer, July 1st to September 15th. That's the in-water work window. Our goal is to build 16 large dams on the BLM lands that'll capture that wood and substrate in safe areas, scour some deep and complex pools, and begin that channel aggregation so we can reconnect with the floodplain. So what do these large stable jams look like? I get a lot of questions on that from folks. And basically it's what's called the natural channel design concept. And it comes from studies on the Queets River in Washington, where, the Queets River is as close as we can get to kind of a reference system. It's undammed, still has big old growth stands next to it, and you can see how wood would naturally accumulate in an unmanipulated river or stream. And so what comes out of those studies on that system is log jams in larger streams accumulate in 2 points. They accumulate on the apex of a bar, as you can see right here. They call that apex bar jam. Or, as I'll show you in the next slide, they can gather on a meander jam and a meander bed. And so a lot of this design work was designed by Brian Baer with the U.S. Forest Service Enterprise team. He's got 30 plus years of experience restoring large river systems. And we quickly saw Rock Creek was kind of, outside of my expertise. I'm used to restoring smaller streams. And so we brought Brian in to do a lot of the design work and help us work through a lot of these, big stream issues. This is just a picture of the meander jam. You can see that it gets caught on this meander bend here. These are some of the designs that help mimic it. These natural channel design jams, they're an engineered log jam. So Brian comes in and calculates 100-year flood elevations, max scour depths, stream grade and substrate size, buoyancy calculations, all that stuff. And then he develops a design that's able to withstand a 100-year flood event. And so the way they do that is they actually dig down into the substrate to the max scour depth, and they build the log jam up out of the substrate. And so when you're looking at this the pictures of the log jams, that's only like half the log jam. The other half is kind of down in the substrate. Everything's kind of locked together. And these log jams are actually designed to capture more wood and increase in size. So it's just kind of like the core of the log jam that's there, and then they're designed to capture wood moving through the system. Here's an example of a design Brian drew up for us. We're looking at trying to do some full spanning log jams in Rock Creek, which is a very big system, but we have some large old growth trees to work with that were fire killed, and so we're able to do these channel spanning jams when sometimes you may not be able to. Here's a picture of a apex bar jam on the Salmon River that Brian designed and built. This jam and the jams on the Salmon River withstood a 100-year flood event and just gained size and created better habitat. And so they've been tested. There's a lot of monitoring on these showing a huge increase in fish numbers and reds above, upstream of them as the gravel accumulates. So there's a lot of monitoring and previous work that shows that these are very effective structures. So kind of in summary, we're looking at the map on the right here is the reaches in Rock Creek that we've designed. The numbered jams are those really big log jams. And then there's some statistics over there on the left that show you how many sites we're going to do and the number of trees. And so we're looking at roughly 16 large dam sites and 830 plus. This is a big contract. It's going to be a $320,000 contract. We're going to have 2 excavators, a shovel, an off-road dump truck. We're going to have a lot of equipment in there because we have a pretty narrow window to accomplish this much work. And we're going to, it's about 2 months of equipment time. So I'm going to be really busy this summer. Here's just a couple maps. One is the Annabelle Reach. The other is kind of the lower Rock Creek Campground Reach. Kind of just shows you the blue is a 25-year floodplain, that kind of blue shading. The numbered kind of polygons there are these large log jams. You can see they span basically the width of the valley floor. It's not just a log jam in the creek. You have logs spread throughout the floodplain as well. So just to recap, our goals in phase 1 are to build 16 large, stable, full-spanning log jams, capture that post-fire stream wood that's going to be coming down, capture that post-fire substrate, specifically spawning gravels, and to scour some deep. So a little less information about phase 2 and phase 3 just because it's so far out and we're trying to focus on phase 1, but we know what we want to do and we have some basic designs to get there. So phase 2 is going to be all about getting reconnection with that extensive floodplain in Rock Creek, reconnecting side channels, and then doing some tributary restoration as well. One of the main ways we're going to reconnect with those floodplains is Brian builds what's called constructed riffles. So he brings in a mix of stream-rounded boulders, cobble, gravel, and some sand, and mixes that together in the right ratio, and he creates what's called a constructed riffle. Raises that stream bed 3 to 4 feet. He gets the grade just right so that spawning gravels drop out upstream of that constructed riffle, and so we'll get some huge spawning bed areas. And they're very natural looking. I've gone to these in the field, and you can't tell where they are. Brian has to point you out to where these constructed riffles are, and they just provide that almost instant reconnection with the floodplain rather than waiting years for that substrate to degrade and build up. So the other part of this floodplain enhancement is what we're calling groundwater channels and pools. And so in Rock Creek, you have a huge floodplain, and that whole floodplain is all made out of cobble, previously deposited cobble and gravel stream cobble. So you have a big water bank just under the surface of the rocks. It's hyporheic flow, we call it. It's flow that's within the substrate but not exposed to air, so it's underneath all that rock there. And these groundwater channels and pools kind of kickstart that floodplain development. We're going to move in, we're going to excavate out some pools and channels in areas where they were historically. We're finding those by LiDAR, and on the ground you can see them. And we excavate them down to 4 to 6 feet until we hit that groundwater. And then you have this flowing, cooler water during the summer that's off-channel habitat. So when these high temperatures come, that we know are going to come because of the loss of riparian canopy, the fish are going to have, the juvenile fish, adult fish are going to have areas to duck into that could be 10 degrees cooler. We also come in and we add some trees to the pools that we create for cover. These have been implemented with a very high success rate on the salmon and zigzag rivers. And like I said before, they're going to provide that critical, what we call cold water refugia for salmonids during those high summer school temperatures. So the goals of that phase 2 are to construct over 13,000 feet of groundwater channels, 32 groundwater pools. We're going to reconnect the stream with over 60 acres of a floodplain with 8 to 10 of these constructed riffles. And we have a pretty extensive monitoring program to, keep an eye on this for effectiveness. So phase 3, even less information on phase 3. Basically, the name of the game with phase 3 is adaptive management. We're going to be monitoring everything we've done in phase 1 and 2, and adaptively, if we need to add more wood, we're going to add more wood. We're going to have the trees to add. If we need to construct more channels or we need to change the depth of those channels, we're going to maybe do that. And then we're really going to be focusing on riparian vegetation restoration. Our botanists at the BLM really have a kind of wait and see approach because of this high severity fire. They want to wait a year or two and see what's coming back and then develop a riparian planting plan based on, what species we're missing. We're probably going to be doing a lot of noxious weed treatments during that time, things like that. So that's all I have on the Rock Creek restoration project. I'd be happy to entertain any questions from Casey, and I have my contact information there. Please, anybody who has questions on the project, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a phone call. I'm a pretty busy guy these days, but I will try to respond to any questions I get.
Thank you so much, Jeff. This was an excellent presentation. We learned a lot. You will get several questions. I know one person already mentioned because of the problems with invasives coming in, and you talked about noxious weeds. How is that going to be dealt with, and how is the water going to be protected in the process?
That's a good question, Casey. I don't know yet. We're trying to build the basis of a plan. So we're starting to go after some grants. You guys put together that grant with the Phoenix School to get some labor to attack this problem when it comes. We're working with Dorina Seed Orchard to help starting to grow some, native plants that we're going to need. So we're kind of trying to think ahead on that, but it's just going to be something that we're going to have to watch and kind of manage as it develops. And I think the best thing we can do right now is get all those parts in place so that we can move fast when we need to. I've been slightly optimistic up in the watershed. I'm seeing some of the alders that made it through the fire that are sprouting, which is great. A lot of the willows are coming back super strong, but I am seeing blackberry sprouts pop up too. And so it's going to be one of these things where we just have to try to manage it as we go and plan ahead and get the grant money in place so that we can move fast and cover big areas.
Yeah, there's so much to be learned about these types of fires, and I imagine the agencies are learning all the time. I'm just curious, how do you capture that, what you're learning? Who's responsible for, okay, these are assumptions, how do we capture that so that we are actually learning from the process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, and I appreciate that question because I'm not doing this in a vacuum either. There's other fish biologists at the BLM that are helping me through this. We work with the Watershed Council, partnership with the Umpqua River. They're helping plan this and think about this project. We brought in Brian Bear, who's, an expert in these restoration projects to kind of help guide us through it and do the designs, help us implement on the ground. And so it's really a team effort. And then within that team, we also have, the Watershed Council monitoring group, water quality monitoring group. And so we've been working with them to develop a pretty, as extensive as we can, monitoring program to monitor, water quality, fish numbers. We're going to be doing a huge number of photo points, so taking before and after photos of the project. It's almost a whole other presentation as to the monitoring we're going to do on this project. But in my experience, the best thing you can do is implement the project to the best of your knowledge and then monitor that over time and adjust as you need to. And so that's the plan. We always want to have a robust monitoring in place, effectiveness monitoring in place to kind of help you move forward through the project.
Yeah, we've been in contact with Sandy Line and Joe Carnes on the monitoring. We actually did some monitoring during our recent river cleanup at 10 sites. And so we're going to provide them with that data. And so we're in the process of trying to do some citizen science of getting people mobilized to help supplement what they're doing because they have a small crew. I think that's really important.
That is really important. You are correct. Citizen science is the future because if patterns keep going, I'm down to, in about a month, I will be the only fish biologist at the Roseburg BLM for a while. And so funding has been decreasing, staffing has been decreasing, and we're trying to do a lot more with a lot less. And so integrating that citizen science and getting volunteers involved and coming up with good plans is really the future of monitoring because that is the hardest thing to find is a workforce to do the monitoring. And funding can be hard to find for monitoring as well. So getting that volunteer workforce would be the more important.
Appreciate that. One last thing, the third Saturday of July is River Appreciation Day, and we've got the Steamboat Ball Field Reserve. We're going to have a major event. We're going to invite all the agencies and PER and other organizations to come in there and talk about the Archie Creek. What we're trying to do is give people hope, what we can do collaboratively to help support the great work that you all are doing, and empower people to be part of the solution. This forest, the Archie Creek area, will never be what it was in our lifetime. But if people can have an impact on doing something, it'll help, especially after 14 months of isolation, people coming together and talking about positive possibilities and collaboration, and not all the negativity that we've seen at times in the last few months, trying to give people some hope there.
That's great, Casey. I will try to be there. I am all for that. I was driving through the Rock Creek Watershed the day after the fire, and I'm not going to lie, I was depressed for about, 8 to 10 days. And then I finally just kind of thought, well, I can keep being depressed, or I can start, looking to the future and trying to get this thing right for, our kids or our kids' kids. And so I fully support that. And I also think it's a great thing to get people together and collaborate, because there's so many moving parts with a lot of this post-fire restoration work that we need to be talking with each other and not kind of, stepping over each other or reinventing things or things like that. And so the more collaboration, the better, and the more support from the public we can get, the better. So I fully support it. And
we're also doing our Camp AmeriCorps. So all the 10 different AmeriCorps sites on Douglas County and Coos County will be spending the whole weekend at Steamboat Ball Field. So these young people who've been basically making poverty wages for the last 11 months, it's their last weekend, and it's a big celebration. And all of those folks were impacted by the Archie Creek. Our AmeriCorps, Ryan Kincaid, came here and was horrified. What am I getting myself into? The whole place is on fire. And to see and to celebrate them, but also to give them some idea of what our community's up against and how we're going to be successful in moving together through the process.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of the AmeriCorps program. I think it's a great program. I've done a lot of work with them, and yeah, that's great.
Okay, Jeff. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it to be our keynote speaker for this year's banquet.
No problem. Thank you, Casey. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate all the great work that Umpqua Watersheds does in the Umpqua Basin, and just keep it up.
Okay, buddy. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Casey. Have a good night.
You too. So long.